Hi. So I'm Christine, and I go by the moniker Chjango Unchained, and I'm the head of communications at Tendermint, and I write for the Cosmos Network. So if you've come across the Cosmos blog, you probably have read some of my blog posts. So that's who I am, and this is the second time I've given this talk. So if you don't mind, it's going to be kind of a read-through. And another thing, if you don't mind, this is going to be in English, and I speak rather quickly. So I apologize in advance. But anyway, let me try to navigate through this first. OK, so in preparing to give this presentation, I went to binge watching Andreas Antonopoulos. If you don't know who Andreas Antonopoulos is, he's sort of this visionary, and he spreads the gospel of Bitcoin. And it's kind of those values and principles that he spread about Bitcoin that got me into cryptocurrency. And so you could kind of say that I'm sort of a crypto anarchist, so that's kind of the angle that I'm coming from today. And I want to lead this talk by quoting Andreas, because it's very, some of the points he makes is very relevant to some of the vision and mission that, that we're kind of bringing forward with the Cosmos Network. So he brings a sliver of perception about being maximalistic towards any single project. And that's kind of what you see with, that's different about Cosmos, and I'll explain. So Andreas says, and I quote, "The idea of having only one world currency is a bit of a throwback to our current currency system. We've grown up with a system of currency where all currencies are backed by nation states. So currencies represent flags. The world is a big chessboard, and currencies are pawns fighting in this big geopolitical battle. And the dollar wins if the ruble fails. It's country versus country. In that environment, it's natural to think that currency as a system is a winner-takes-all game, or a zero-sum game. And the only way that one currency wins is by another currency losing. And that's a world in which you cut off your nose to spite your face. But what if instead, all along, money was simply a form of language? What if we understood that money was a way for us to communicate value to each other? And as a language, there will never be one that wins. There will always be a variety. The bottom line is, languages adapt to their local environment. There isn't one language wins. In fact, if you speak 3 languages or 4 languages, it's always better than speaking 1 language. So in fact, having variety is what gives you greater value. And what if money works that way? So in that same vein, Cosmos envisions not one token, not one blockchain to rule them all. We envision a world with thousands of blockchains. So just like the way you see, thousands of ERC20s and 721s, thousands of tokens in the token economy right now, what you're going to see in the future, what I envision that we're going to start seeing is there's going to be a world with thousands of blockchains running their own application-specific users' needs, and that's how you scale. So before Cosmos, you had very limited choices. You had to fork the Bitcoin code base if you wanted to build a decentralized app. So early forks of Bitcoin, like Litecoin or Zcash, had very, very high upstream maintenance requirements, but very low added functionality they could add on top of Bitcoin. Yet, Bitcoin maximalists call every innovation that isn't building on top of Bitcoin a scam. And you could sort of see that this mindset brings us back to the mindset found in traditional currency systems, where there's one chain, one currency to rule them all. It's sort of a zero-sum mindset. So with Ethereum, what Sunny, one of our researchers, calls the second generation of blockchain development, Ethereum implemented a concept called the smart contract, which was first introduced by Nick Szabo. And the idea, or the concept that Vitalik and Gavin had, was that many application developers would want to build decentralized apps, and they would want to launch tokens. So came the ERC token standards. And so you saw the wave of, or the Cambrian explosion of dApps that came about after they lowered the barrier to entry to create tokens. And so that, the market validated Vitalik and Gavin's idea. And building on that, in 2014, Jay Kwan and Ethan Buckman sort of saw this blockchain scalability problem of having a global VM run all the dApps on top of a single blockchain. And so they came up with a different paradigm. And that different paradigm is what we call the third generation of blockchain development. So the third generation is the Cosmos SDK. So we introduce a blockchain application framework that developers can use to build their own blockchains. They could stack it on top of each other like Tetris pieces. Like there's Tendermint, and you could stack your application logic on top of it. There you got a blockchain, kind of like what June was explaining. So the bet with that is that the market of developers would demand more control over what happens on their dApps and who governs their dApps. And simultaneously, they don't trade off any security in order to govern their own dApp and run it and everything. So this is the value proposition that Cosmos addresses, which is fundamentally different from the value proposition that like Ethereum smart contracts addresses, which is easily launching a token, right? But you don't really get any control over what happens on the blockchain that your dApp runs on. So when I bring this up, I get asked this question a lot. So is Cosmos eating Ethereum's lunch? That's not the goal. And that is actually antithetical to the decentralization ethos, which is the idea that one chain, one token should be the winning currency or taking the #1 spot on CoinMarketCap. Understandably, this is the naturally occurring thought that comes with the one chain to rule them all mindset. And it predictably concludes that Cosmos is trying to, I don't know, be an ETH killer like many of the other projects are. But that's not the goal. The goal of Cosmos is to provide an open protocol through which value is communicated. So what happened in the 80s and 90s during the early days of the internet when people were starting to realize that if you could get computers to talk to each other and collaborate, this incredible flow of information could start happening. So the internet led to the opening of the floodgates of free and open information. With cryptocurrency, value is freed. So what if we enable people to build their own tokens of value, give them the ability to spin up a blockchain, give them the building blocks to easily create highways to communicate with other blockchains in a trustless and secure manner? And that is the big what if that Cosmos is attempting to solve. Sorry, technical difficulty. So what we're building is a communication protocol, IBC, for interblockchain communication, and this is the communication highway through which all chains could use to speak to one another. So this highway is what we use to facilitate interoperability. What we mean when we say interoperability is that blockchains could talk to one another and transfer data, which are essentially bytes with one another. So eventually, you can not just transfer tokens. You could make smart contract calls across blockchains, but that's years away. But in theory, it's possible. So what happens if we continue on this model of one chain to rule them all, one Bitcoin or one Ethereum chain to be the winning chain? Then we're reverting back to the old mindset, replacing the old the currency controllers of the old system, the central bankers, with the core developers and the miners of the blockchain. And we're not fundamentally changing the architecture. So if you look at what Cosmos is proposing, this internet of blockchains, you could envision a universe of peer-to-peer networks, mesh networks, relayers, and thousands of chains just running their application-specific needs. And with this model, you could sort of envision the internet of blockchains coming to fruition. So what Cosmos provides is a pre-built blockchain framework, what you could use to stack on top of one another. You've got a consensus algorithm and a gossip protocol in a box. That's what we call Tendermint. That's the green module in the middle. And we've got an SDK that allows you to write application logic in sandboxed modules. So each of these modules that you see, they're sandboxed, and something like the DAO attack couldn't happen. Well, it would be less likely to happen. And this is the security model of the SDK. We call it least authority access, or object capabilities. That's a little more obscure name, but that's how secure it is when you build with the Cosmos stack. So the stack is totally abstracted from one another. So that's what the Tendermint ABCI is. It abstracts away from the consensus layer and the application logic. And eventually, you could even abstract the peer-to-peer layer. You could just like swap in a different peer-to-peer gossip protocol. So the SDK doesn't force you to have anything to do with Cosmos. If you don't want to interoperate with the Cosmos Hub or other blockchains, you don't have to. It's just a module, and you could just you could plug it in or leave it out. The choice is yours. So what it ultimately boils down to is choice. This technology gives people choice. The SDK is a general purpose framework that offers an alternative, not competing solution to Solidity smart contracts. Smart contracts have their own benefits that a segment of decentralized application developers may desire that the SDK doesn't provide. And conversely, the SDK provides different benefits that smart contracts don't provide. So maybe you want to build a dynamic decentralized application with like over 20,000 users. You could do that with Tendermint. Maybe you want to build a decentralized video streaming application. There's a project called Lino, or you want to create a token economy for the music industry. There's a project called Playlist, and they actually have 20,000 users, and they're running on Tendermint. This is where the SDK comes in. So this is where you would want to build your app as its own blockchain, and you could spin it up pretty easily and service all your users with very fast and high throughput. And if you wanted to easily bootstrap the security of your dApp, we call it your dApp chain, you could do that. It would be a shared security. You would use a shared security module in the SDK. That's currently that's the core module, and it's not developed yet, but it's coming along in the future roadmap. So if you want to build a payment application or a decentralized exchange, for example, you could leverage Plasma. So there's a project called Fourth State. It's a group of blockchain at Berkeley students who are building a general purpose Plasma chain. And basically, they're using the SDK to build their Plasma child chain. And they're starting with Ethereum as the root chain, but ultimately in the future, any virtual machine that can host smart contracts could be the root chain for this Plasma SDK. So eventually, you will be able to launch a Plasma chain through Fourth State's Plasma SDK, and then Plasma's SDK is basically composed of these modules that you see highlighted here. So by providing the foundation for innovation to happen, you could bring your decentralized app to the end user. So you have the choice to use the open protocols that Cosmos provides, or not. And with those tools, you could create the change that you want to see in the world. And it's one iteration forward along the evolution of blockchain technology. And And perhaps we could start to see widespread usage of blockchain-based applications, and you could start realizing the slogan of decentralize, all the things becoming a reality. So other projects will inevitably spring up, and that builds on the innovations that we've just talked about today. But ultimately, everything's going to change, and nothing maintains the status quo. But as long as any blockchain project is able to maintain its fundamental principles, helps lead mankind to societal change, and help people to free themselves, then that to me indicates that we have succeeded with the technology that we bring to the table. So this is your tool set to make societal change, and it's ready for you to build on or just check out. And we leave it up to you to create the application that you dream up. So what will you build? Thank you. That's me, Chjango, on Twitter, and that's it. Yeah, that's kind of the network topology of the Cosmos network. You could see that circular planet-like thing is the Cosmos hub, and there's the Iris hub, if you guys have heard of it. Thank you.